The air was thick with dust and desperation. Under the punishing sun at the US-Mexico border, tents flapped weakly in the wind, and rows of tired faces stared toward nothing. The camp was silent, save for the occasional cry of a child or a coughing fit that echoed too long. Then a murmur rose. A figure in white, unaccompanied, stepped onto the dry soil. No procession, no armed guards. Just an old man in a plain white cassock, walking steadily through the encampment like he'd lived there his whole life. The people stared, confused. Some bowed their heads, others didn't recognize him. But the murmurs grew louder. It was Pope Leo XIV. He didn't say a word. Instead, he knelt, in the dust, beside a frail woman holding a sleeping infant. He reached for her hand, gently, and held it. Subscribe to the channel for more true and powerful stories like this one. Witness moments that move the world and the human spirit. Born Matteo Rinaldi in the slums of Buenos Aires, the man now known as Pope Leo XIV was no stranger to suffering. The son of factory workers who fled instability in southern Italy, he grew up in a crowded one-bedroom with 4 siblings. Hunger wasn't abstract. It was breakfast. His faith was not born in opulence, but in the quiet kindness of a local parish that fed them on cold nights. By 19, Matteo was studying theology, walking to classes after cleaning the church at dawn. His early work focused on community outreach in Buenos Aires' poorest barrios. He took vows of humility and service long before he ever wore a collar. His rise through the church was steady, driven not by politics but by persistence, compassion, and a refusal to ignore suffering. When elected pope, he shocked the world. He declined the papal apartment, choosing a modest guest room instead. He replaced golden crosses with wooden ones. He washed the feet of prisoners. He said often, "We must be where the pain lives." And now he was. The encampment spanned acres of makeshift shelters, populated by those displaced from Central America, Haiti, Syria. Sister Angela, a nun with calloused hands and a soft voice, guided the Pope through the maze of humanity. She'd worked here for 5 years, long enough to know every name, every wound. He asked to come quietly, she later whispered. No cameras, no speeches, just presence. As they walked, a girl caught the Pope's eye. 12, maybe, small, hollow cheeks and wide, watchful eyes. Her name was Samar, Syrian. She had crossed 3 countries with her uncle before he died of pneumonia in a shelter last month. Since then, she hadn't spoken. She sat curled under a tattered blanket, clutching a worn stuffed bear. When the Pope knelt beside her, she looked away, unblinking. He didn't try to talk. He simply sat, his body close enough to feel the warmth of hers in the shade. Time passed. 5 minutes. 10. No one disturbed them. Later, Sister Angela said, "That's when I knew this visit wasn't for us, it was for her." As night approached, Pope Leo refused the air-conditioned trailer prepared for him. Instead, he asked for a mat. "If they sleep on the ground," he said, "then so do I." Under the open sky, surrounded by the soft rustling of shifting bodies and whispered prayers, he lay in silence. And for the first time in months, Samar got up, walked to his side, and lay down near him. The Pope did not move, but a tear rolled slowly down his cheek. By sunrise, the Pope was already awake. He had helped distribute water at the break of dawn, carrying jugs with worn hands that hadn't labored like this in decades, but he moved slowly, with care, pausing often to meet eyes, to listen, to bless. Father Michael Torres stood nearby, arms crossed, unimpressed. A priest born and raised in El Paso, he had spent the last 3 years organizing volunteers, clinics, and food distribution at the border. His sermons were filled with anger, exhaustion, and realism. When he approached the Pope, it wasn't with reverence. "You think sitting in the dirt changes anything?" he asked flatly. "Symbolism doesn't stop hunger." Pope Leo looked at him for a long moment. "It's not symbolism," he said. "It's recognition." Michael shook his head. "They need food, not attention." The Pope nodded. "Then show me where to begin." Sister Angela stood between them, tension in her eyes. "Father Michael has been the backbone here, but "He's tired." The Pope said nothing more. Instead, that afternoon he asked for a basin of water. Then, in the center of the camp, surrounded by skeptics and silence, he began washing the feet of the refugees. One by one they came, hesitant, bewildered, then overcome. Some wept openly. Others clutched his shoulders as if afraid to fall. Michael watched from the distance, arms still crossed. Later that evening, Sister Angela found the Pope sitting alone by the campfire, wiping his hands with a rag. She sat beside him. "He's not wrong," she whispered. "We need medicine and shelter. We're running out of antibiotics." "I know," said the Pope, eyes fixed on the flames, "and I cannot fix it all. But I can stand beside it." Back in Rome, Cardinal Bellini received the news with rising concern. A seasoned Vatican official, Bellini had spent his career guarding tradition, protocol, and image. Leo XIV's unsanctioned trip had already alarmed key donors. Now word of him sleeping on mats and washing feet was fueling headlines that unsettled the hierarchy. He called a meeting with the Secretary of State. "This behavior," he said through clenched teeth, "it endangers our neutrality. He risks entangling the Church in volatile politics." A carefully worded statement was drafted and released to the press. The Holy Father's visit is a gesture of pastoral solidarity, not a political statement. But Leo XIV had no interest in statements. He had cancelled 3 planned meetings in Washington, including one with a Senate delegation, to remain in the camp another day. He gave up his allotted bed again that night, this time for an elderly Guatemalan man with diabetes who had collapsed from dehydration earlier. The Pope ate beans and rice, sitting cross-legged among the people. They sang hymns softly in different languages. Michael approached him once more. "You're making headlines." Leo glanced up. "So are forest fires. You really believe this matters?" "I believe presence matters. It's what Christ did." Michael didn't respond, but he didn't walk away either. Later, as the Pope made his way to the edge of the camp to visit a sick child, Samar appeared again, a few steps behind. She still hadn't spoken. But now she followed, and the Pope smiled ever so slightly. By the 3rd day, the world had taken notice. Aerial footage showed a white-robed figure kneeling beside children, holding cracked hands, sharing bread. Major networks ran banners. "The Pope lives in a refugee camp." Social media erupted with hashtags. "Pope in the Dust" trended for 2 days straight. Supporters praised his humility. "A prophet of our time," one journalist wrote. "The Church finally remembers the poor." Others were skeptical, accusing him of performative gestures, and a growing chorus of critics saw it as a direct affront to political order. Inside the camp, it didn't matter. Refugees lined up not for miracles, but for a moment with the man who didn't leave, the man who still slept on the ground. In a makeshift clinic, Pope Leo helped distribute oral rehydration salts. When a woman collapsed, he carried her in his arms to Sister Angela, who administered fluids and antibiotics. The Pope's back ached, and his joints stiffened with every movement, but he showed no sign of slowing. Father Michael, still watching him with guarded curiosity, said quietly to Angela, "He's stubborn." She smiled. "Yes, like Christ was." Back in Rome, Cardinal Bellini convened another emergency session. The Pope's actions had crossed a line. This was no longer pastoral solidarity, it was insubordination. Donors were pulling out of key projects. Allies in the Curia grew silent. One cardinal reportedly said, "He is no longer leading the Church. He is living his own gospel." The Vatican's press office released a second statement, meant to control the narrative. But Leo XIV bypassed it altogether. He recorded a short video from inside the camp, seated beside a child with tuberculosis. "This is not outreach," he said. "This is where I belong." The video went viral in hours. News anchors debated its implications. Catholic leaders around the world were split. Some celebrated his radical empathy. Others warned of chaos. But something changed that day. Sister Angela noticed first. Volunteers who had left months ago returned. A truck arrived from Arizona filled with supplies. A doctor from Mexico City came, offering free vaccinations, water filters, tarps, solar panels, all donated within 48 hours. What had once been an isolated outpost began transforming into a lifeline. The Pope said little. He moved with quiet purpose, grateful but not triumphant. Michael approached him again. "You've stirred something," he admitted. "Not me," said the Pope. "Compassion did." One afternoon, as the Pope sat with a group of children drawing with chalk on cardboard, Samar approached again. This time she carried a piece of paper folded neatly. She handed it to him and waited. Inside was a simple drawing, a stick figure in white robes holding hands with a smaller figure, a girl with a stuffed bear. The Pope's hands trembled slightly. He looked at her and whispered, "Is this you?" She nodded. Then, with a soft, raspy voice, she spoke for the first time since arriving. "My name is Samar." The Pope closed his eyes, overcome. Sister Angela nearby pressed a hand to her heart. Later that evening, Leo knelt in prayer near the campfire. Michael sat beside him without invitation. "You're staying longer?" "As long as they need me." Michael looked across the field, at the families, the food lines, the flicker of hope returning. "Then I'll stay too." For the first time, Pope Leo smiled fully. The camp was no longer just surviving, it was awakening. Word of the Pope's continued presence drew attention beyond headlines. Aid organizations rerouted supplies. Clinics from Denver and Monterey sent medical teams. A bakery in Phoenix delivered warm loaves each morning. Volunteers arrived by the dozens, bringing soap, shoes, and sleeping bags. A retired nurse from Ohio said, "If he can sleep in the dirt, so can I." But not all were moved by inspiration. Within Vatican walls, pressure mounted. Cardinal Bellini gathered allies. "He's redefining the papacy without consent," he warned. "This isn't compassion, it's chaos." A confidential memorandum circulated among senior clergy, questioning the Pope's health, judgment, and theological stability. One bishop wrote, "This is a man consumed by his own narrative, not the Church's mission." That same bishop leaked internal letters to the press. Headlines screamed, "Vatican in crisis, Pope faces rebellion from within." Meanwhile, protesters began to appear. Outside St. Peter's Square, banners rose both for and against Leo XIV. "He has abandoned the chair of Peter," read one sign. Another, more quietly, simply read, "He found Christ in the dust." Inside the camp, the Pope remained silent about the storm brewing across the Atlantic. His days continued, washing, listening, sitting. He spoke little, but when he did, it was with clarity and purpose. Father Michael and Sister Angela had become his closest confidants. Together, they coordinated food drops, medical charts, and shelter upgrades. Michael led evening prayer now, and Samar often sat at his side. "What will you do when they call you home?" Angela asked one night. The Pope stirred the fire gently. "Home is where the forgotten are." They shared a long silence. Then Michael added, "Rome doesn't see it that way." "I know." Back in Rome, a group of conservative cardinals proposed an extraordinary session to consider limitations on papal travel. Some whispered the word abdication, though none dared speak it openly. But Pope Leo refused to engage. Instead, he wrote. His open letter, released quietly to every diocese in the world, began, "We are not a church of stone, but of people, and people suffer here." He described not only what he had seen, but what he had heard. The stories of Samar, of mothers who buried children in transit, of men who sold everything for the dream of a border that would not open. He did not blame. He did not attack. He simply invited the church to listen again. He closed with, "We cannot preach resurrection if we refuse to descend into the tombs of this world." The letter spread faster than any press release. Priests printed it for Sunday Mass. Nuns read it in schools. Catholic hospitals pinned it beside staff bulletins. Bishops translated it into local dialects for remote villages. At the camp, the refugees themselves heard it. A volunteer read it aloud in Spanish and Arabic. People sat in rapt silence, heads bowed, some crying, others clutching hands. Samar looked up at the Pope. "You wrote that for us?" "I wrote it with you." That night, as stars lit the sky above the desert, a quiet certainty settled over the camp. They were no longer a footnote. They were no longer invisible, and the Pope, still sleeping on a mat among them, had become more than a visitor. He was part of their story now. The dust had settled, but the tension had not. Cardinal Bellini arrived at the camp in a black SUV with tinted windows, his face pale from the heat and the flight. He walked stiffly between tents flanked by aides, his shoes sinking slightly into the sand. Children watched curiously. Volunteers paused. Word spread quickly. The Pope was waiting by the communal fire, kneeling as he sorted donated shoes by size. When Bellini approached, the camp fell quiet. "Your Holiness," the cardinal said, bowing slightly but without warmth, "it's time to return to Rome." Pope Leo did not rise. He simply nodded. "You've made your point," Bellini continued. "But the Church needs order. Presence cannot replace governance." Still kneeling, the Pope gestured for him to sit. Before Bellini could respond, a voice rose behind him. "Wait." It was Sama. She stood beside Sister Angela, holding her drawing again, the same one she had given to the Pope. But this time she held it high, walking slowly toward Bellini. She began to speak. "My name is Samar. I am 12. I saw my mother die in the sea. I saw my uncle die here because no doctor came. I didn't speak for months. Not until he came." Her voice trembled, but did not break. "He didn't talk about heaven. He just sat with me. He let me be real. He let me be a child again." Bellini's mouth tightened. His eyes, though, betrayed something else. He looked down at the dusty ground, then back at the Pope. No words passed between them. Later that day, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Pope Leo prepared to hold Mass in the open air. A makeshift altar had been set with plastic crates and a white cloth. Hundreds gathered. Refugees, volunteers, doctors, locals who had walked miles. Father Michael helped organize the space, his hands steady. Sama held the Pope's vestment as he walked forward. He began the homily softly. "Christ does not wait for us in cathedrals. He waits beside broken tents. He weeps behind fences. He stands where hope is thin and love is rare." A breeze moved through the crowd. "We are not here to offer pity. We are here to remember what it means to see each other, not as problems but as people." Many in the crowd wept openly. Faith without proximity is theater, and the Church is not called to perform. When the Mass ended, people remained in place, unwilling to let go of the moment. That night, for the first time, Michael knelt beside the Pope without resistance, tears glistening in his eyes. "You reminded me why I became a priest." The Pope touched his shoulder gently. Back in Rome days later, Pope Leo returned not in triumph, but in quiet. But his absence had changed everything. He announced a new initiative, Sanctuarium Terrae, a global network of support centers where church resources would be redirected to walk beside the displaced, the hungry, the exiled. No longer through intermediaries, but directly, personally. Many resisted, many applauded, but no one ignored it. In a small office near St. Peter's, Sama's drawing was framed behind the Pope's desk. It showed two figures, still holding hands. If this story moved you, subscribe to our channel for more powerful and true narratives of faith, courage, and humanity. And click the video on your screen now to discover another story of someone who chose compassion over comfort and changed the world.